So the problem of consciousness is really the problem of how do we explain this real, undeniable, subjective experience of being aware, being alive, being awake, being conscious. How do we quantify it? We've tried and tried and tried. Because we have failed, a part of the scientific community has simply accepted that there is no such thing as consciousness. It is not something real. It is just a byproduct of all our interactions. It is because we have senses and we are perceiving the world through our senses, that itself is giving us this experience of being, experience of I amness. When we truly understand consciousness, we'll see this is impossible. Consciousness has to be there as the canvas, as the unmoving, unchanging phenomenon that allows for movement and change. Without consciousness, we cannot recognize anything. We cannot recognize movement. We cannot recognize change. We cannot recognize the body, the world around us, nothing. Because we haven't solved the problem, it has remained an hard problem. It has remained not only a difficult problem, but to such an extent that we have accepted that perhaps physics will never answer the question of consciousness. For example, Ed Witten, when asked about the problem of consciousness, he is regarded as one of the smartest minds, and he is. He says, well, I will not speculate on the nature of consciousness in a way that I believe that it will not be a part of physics, because he believes that consciousness will not be a part of physics because it is too mysterious, too elusive. Of course, these are not exactly his words. The actual reason as to why he believes it cannot be a part of physics is his own reasoning. It just seems way too different and transcendental from physics. There is something very elusive about the nature of consciousness that physics cannot grasp. Till you understand consciousness as a higher dimension, till you properly understand how to move from a lower dimension to a higher dimension. Once you see consciousness as the fourth dimension, just as there is a point, there is a line, there is space, there is a plane, there is space, then there is mind. Mind is not something that is generated in the brain. It is the fourth dimension. That is why it has been so difficult for us to understand, because a higher dimension, by its very nature, will be beyond the direct grasp and perception of lower dimensional creatures. Because lower dimensional creatures themselves are a projection from the higher dimension. So the hardest thing to see will be the source from where we are being projected. That is why it's a hard problem, because it is not even three-dimensional. It's not being generated as a byproduct of physical processes. It is the fundamental nature of reality. It is not space, it is not time, it is not matter, it is not energy that are fundamental. It is consciousness that is fundamental. Once we begin to see that this thing cannot be generated in our three-dimensional world because of the limitation of space and time. In fact, space and time themselves are perceptual limitations in consciousness. When you remove all perceptual limitation, you get a vast, unrestricted entity which is a totality everywhere at all times. Each point is aware of all other points simultaneously. Now, this awareness of totality that is available at every point in the fourth dimension is consciousness. Once we understand consciousness as an existential phenomenon, mathematically we can get to it. Of course, we cannot mathematically define consciousness except to call it an existential totality, but we can use mathematics to get to it. Once we are able to do this, now we can no longer say consciousness cannot be a part of physics, because all physical phenomena emerge from consciousness. If consciousness cannot be a part of physics, then physics is incomplete to such an extent that it is only a model. It is only a representation of truth, not truth at all. But this we cannot accept, and we should not accept. Maybe there is something more to understand. There are more problems to solve. And we know the way we approach problems and the way we solve them using physics tells us that when the most important problem, the problem of consciousness, is solved, physics will be able to explain it. The language of physics will be the most suitable to understand and explain consciousness objectively. Consciousness will be the domain of physics. In fact, to me, it's not even an idea now. It's not even a wish. It's an existential fact. The day I saw the connection between the third dimension and the fourth dimension and saw consciousness as the fourth dimension, it became a part of physics for me. In fact, for me, that was the moment I truly fell in love with physics. Up until then, I always felt there is something abstract about physics. It talks about things that are not directly concerning me. So if I have to stay closer to reality, stay closer to the truth, then I have to be closer to philosophy, closer to meditation, closer to a spiritual understanding of life, not physics. But the day I saw the connection between our world and consciousness, and that connection can be established through mathematics, it became obvious that physics is the most beautiful, most elegant way of objectively understanding the nature of reality, including consciousness. Of course, the true mystery of consciousness, the true magic of consciousness, the true vastness and magnanimity of consciousness can only be subjectively experienced from inside. So the inward journey can never be replaced. But on the outside, objectively, it is physics that will explain what consciousness is and how consciousness creates our three-dimensional world. Mathematically, experimentally, we'll be able to show this. That is when we would have solved the hard problem of consciousness. In fact, in my opinion, a lot of people have solved the problem of consciousness, but only philosophically. For example, Buddha solved the problem of consciousness, but he did it philosophically. If you study Buddha's teachings, you will know everything you have to know about consciousness. You will know what mind is. You will know what thoughts are. You will know what is the fundamental nature of reality. You will know birth. You will know death. But it's all philosophical. You cannot bring all that knowledge under physics. That has been the problem. So in a way, we have solved the problem of consciousness, but we have only solved it as individuals through an inward journey. An individual has solved it for himself. When the question arises, who am I? What is the purpose of life? That itself is an inquiry into consciousness. You might not be using the word consciousness. Every time you say or you ask the question, who am I? You are basically asking, I want to solve this problem of consciousness. I know I am. I know I'm conscious, but I don't know who I am. I don't know what I am. I don't know where I've come from. I want to solve it. Ramana Maharshi's entire method of inquiry was, who am I? So the problem has been solved by individuals, but they've never been able to explain it using a language that physics can understand. Because the language of physics is very specific. The language of mathematics is very specific. Unless you precisely understand what consciousness is objectively and where it fits in our scheme of things, because we already have a wealth of knowledge, wealth of information that we have gathered by understanding nature objectively. We have general relativity, we have quantum mechanics, two extraordinarily successful ways of explaining the nature of reality. Now, if consciousness has to be brought in, it has to be brought in such a way that it can connect these two branches. It can explain quantum phenomena. It can explain gravity. Now, Buddha cannot do this because he does not know the language of physics. He does not know the language of general relativity. This divide has been absolute up until now. Physicists have been doing their own thing, and awakened individuals have been doing their own thing. When you bring these together, again, it has to just happen. These are two completely different ways of inquiring into the nature of reality. It is very rare that these two can come together. Because if you become a physicist, by the very nature of how you inquire, you're not going on an inward subjective journey to know what consciousness is, to understand the true nature of consciousness. So you're always disconnected from the truth. But on the other hand, if you go on a subjective experience and know and experience consciousness as what it is, although that experience is not science, once you are introduced to the language of science, you'll be able to make the connection.